and filling in. Well, we're going to start off, I think, on 66. Anyway, look on page 67 there. See that stealth bomber? Everybody knows what a stealth bomber is? That bad thing right there. Okay? If you notice the way it's made in a way in which it's called stealth so that it won't pick up so much on radar. However, now they can pick them up. So it's no longer stealth any longer. But it was for a long, long time. But anyway, this thing here is capable, if I remember correctly, capable of carrying 16 nuclear bombs, all right? And those things are up to, I think it was 80 of some other bombs where they actually could take something and strap on to them and actually make them into, they were regular just gravity-fed bombs that would drop down, but they would attach an attachment onto the bomb itself and actually turn it into something that they could use to guide, like the laser-guided missiles and so forth. So they could actually use the GPS coordinates and things and actually cause it to go down where they would want it to go down at. So that was a pretty powerful arsenals that they have there. And like I said, too, they can carry up to 16 of these nuclear warheads. Not the warheads, bombs, okay? Now, each one of those bombs are capable of going up to 1.5 megatons, okay? So you can imagine the awesome power that there is. Now, remember, what fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was 15 kilotons. So you talk about one of these bombs being equal to 1,000 times greater, and then you have 16 of these things. So you can imagine the firepower that is on there, of the amount of damage that it can do. All right, let's turn over here where it says peace, peace, true peace. You see where it talks about the destruction there. Okay, turn over to page 66 here, talking about the prophetic word. Now, remember, all of this power and authority that has been given to the beast, of course, by the authority of the dragon, of Satan herself, is going to end up nothing but destruction. That's all that Satan looks forward to, is destroying this earth. And that's what she wants to do. She wants to destroy all of mankind. So that's the type of peace that she's forcing upon the world. Now here on page 66, okay, the prophetic word. And it says in Jeremiah 23, verses 29 to 40, Yahweh inspired the prophets of old to write about the prophetic word, saying here in verse 29, is not my word like a fire, says Yahweh, and like a hammer which breaks rocks into pieces. Now just think of that, the power and authority that is, okay? Talk about this hammer. As a hammer, rock is one of the hardest things that there is in nature. And then you have a hammer, slinging a hammer and hitting a rock. It's a very dangerous thing to do, okay? I mean, you do some stupid things when you're children trying to break up rocks and stuff, and you don't even think about eye protection or nothing like that, and it's a great way to get an eye knocked out. But you can imagine when you hit those rocks, how it just crushes it, and you have to hit it pound and pound and pound on it for it to finally start breaking apart. And he says it's like fire. And of course, fire will devour, right? Fire is a cleansing agent. So it cleanses and devours and breaks things apart. And that's what it does with our carnal nature. Yahweh's word, as it enters into us, he literally pounds us down. Remember, we are represented, right? This work is represented by the golden lampstand. And remember, the gold was beaten, right? It was beaten down, and everything is taken out of it, the impurities and stuff. So he says, therefore, behold, I am against the prophets, says Yahweh, who steal my words one from another. Okay? They steal their words. And this goes on today. Many people are not part of the house of Yahweh, but they'll read the house of Yahweh literature, and then they'll turn around, and preachers will turn around and preach it as if it's their own, and their own understanding, and not acknowledge that it comes from Yahweh's house. He says, behold, I am against the prophets, says Yahweh, who make up their own speeches, okay, and they say this is what Yahweh says. In other words, they're not being sent by Yahweh. They don't have Yahweh's authority to do what they do, but they make up their own speeches. And remember, the scripture says that they would turn, they would want tickle the ears of the people, and the people would run to them to want to see what they had to say. Behold, he says, I'm against those who prophesy false dreams, says Yahweh. They tell and cause my people to err, okay, by their lies and their recklessness. Yet I did not send them, nor command them, and they are of no benefit to this people at all. There's no benefit to anyone who is not sent by Yahweh, without the authority of Yahweh. There's just absolutely no benefit of these people. And notice, he says, I haven't sent them, so they went on their own authority. And if they go on their own authority and they come up with their own speeches, their own dreams, then they're not of any benefit to the people, as he says. And the thing is, you remember what Yahweh says, like when he was talking about Moshe, remember he says, that Moshe, I would speak to him face to face, right? He says, I would not speak to him in dreams, or nor would I speak to him in any other way, but I would speak to him face to face, okay? And so when it talks about these prophets with these dreams, okay, they were dreamers. They dreamed up their own idea of what they should bring forth to the people. And this is why he says here, that he says in the next verse, so when these people or the prophet or priest ask you, saying, what is the burden of Yahweh? Then will you say to them, you are the burden of Yahweh, says Yahweh. So the prophet, you remember, was told that, if the people, a prophet or a priest, would ask them. Now remember, these were not the people of Yahweh. These were not the prophets of Yahweh, and these were not the priests of Yahweh. Limmuwdyah was a prophet of Yahweh, but they weren't. And so he says, if they ask, what is the burden of Yahweh? Notice, to them it was a burden. It's a burden, remember? And remember what the scripture says, that the law of Yahweh is not grievous, right? It's not a grievous thing to keep Yahweh's laws. But to them they said, what is this burden? And he says, you are the burden. Okay? And as for the prophets, like the priests and the people who will say, the prophetic word of Yahweh is a burden, I will even punish the man and his house. Okay? Not that he would punish him, but remember that Yahweh would allow the chastisement to come upon him, because accursed causes will not come, remember. So there's a reason why the curse would come. And he was simply saying, when Yahweh says, I'm going to punish a man, okay, the way it's written, it just simply means that he's going to allow, the punishment is, okay, is that you're going to bring the curses upon yourself. And he's going to allow that, because he can't step in and stop it. He could if he wanted, but he can't if he wants to teach someone a lesson. He has to allow them to go through it. But he's only going to allow someone, remember, to go through something, only what they can handle, right? He's not going to force them into anything or allow them to go to anything that's going to go beyond what they can actually handle. Remember, like Job, right? Satan came against him. He says, you can only do so much, but you can't go any further, right? And so this is the way that Yahweh works with his people. He allows us to be tested. He allows us to be tried. But he also allows it only to a certain extent, because he knows what we're made of. He knows that, it's not like Yahweh wants to break his people down and tear us down and cause us to go insane, which he could do if he wanted, right? But he doesn't want anything like that. That's never enters into his mind to be that way. This is what makes Yahweh different from the gods, okay? And remember, we're talking about devil worship here, okay? The devils, she does want people's mind to break down. She does want people to go in crazy. She wants mankind to kill themselves, to destroy themselves completely. So she'll do anything, and she teaches this God worship, this devil worship. So he goes on, he says, this is what you will say to every man to his neighbor and everyone to his brother. What has Yahweh answered, and what has Yahweh spoken? But the expression, the burden of Yahweh, you will mention no more. For the message comes to man by the prophetic word. For you have perverted the words of the living Father of Yahweh of hosts. So notice, he was telling them, he says, because of your dreams, because of your own interpretations, because of all the things that you're doing and leading the people astray, you've perverted the words of Yahweh. But however, the message of Yahweh is going to come through the prophetic word. Very important words there. And this is the reason why the House of Yahweh magazine, monthly magazine, is called the prophetic word. This is because it's the work of Yahweh, okay? And Yahweh would have no work other than those that the prophets have spoken in advance, right? This is what you will say to the prophet. What has Yahweh answered, and what has Yahweh spoken? But if you say the burden of Yahweh, then this is what Yahweh has said. because you mention that expression, the burden of Yahweh, and I have sent to you, saying, do not say the burden of Yahweh. Therefore, behold, I, even I, will utterly forget you, and I will forsake you. Okay, so now what Yahweh is saying here is if you forsake the message of Yahweh, which comes to the prophetic word, if you forsake these things, and when he's saying, I'm not going to make mention of you, remember what the prophets wrote. Yahweh says, you will be no priest to me, right? The people were destroyed because of lack of knowledge. If they rejected the prophetic word coming to them, if they rejected these things and didn't want anything to have to do with it, then they had no knowledge. They had no understanding. If they had no knowledge and understanding, then Yahweh says, I'm going to reject you as priest. You will be no priest unto me. Therefore, behold, I, even I, will utterly forget you, he says, and I will forsake you. Because remember now, Yahweh already had said, long, long before this prophet ever wrote this, remember? He says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Okay? So there has to be a reason why Yahweh says, I'm going to forsake you. He's not actually just forsaking us, but remember, he can't look upon those who have sinned. So those who turn against him with sin, he has to turn away. He has to let them go. Okay, he says, I will bring an everlasting reproach upon you and a perpetual shame which shall not be forgotten. Now, the prophet Jeremiah, this word prophet, we're going to look at that in a little bit, but let's see. The prophet Jeremiah was inspired to write, the message of Yahweh comes by the prophetic word. And it's in this word that the inspired prophecy is written in the scriptures, which is the last warning which Yahweh gives to mankind, okay, before this destruction comes. And the apostles believed the prophets, and they trusted in the word of Yahweh. They trusted this prophetic word that was given, okay, because of what it is. In 2 Kepha 1, 16 through 21, he says, and we have not followed cunningly devised fables. You know, it's not fables. It's not some, yet today, some still consider, the scriptures as being fables. It's like, you can't believe that. That was written thousands of years ago. That was man-written. That was written by man, But yet, man writes the news reports. They believe that, don't they? But they won't believe the prophecies that's written by man, that's inspired by man. So he says, we have not followed these cunningly, devised fables. We have made known to you the power and the coming of our King, Yeshua Messiah. But we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. Remember that. They were eyewitnesses. They saw these things. They saw and they testified that these things are true. For he received from Yahweh the Father honor and glory. Now, he hasn't received this yet. Of course, he received it from Yahweh, and that's all that counts at this time for him. But of course, he didn't receive it from man because they rejected him. They hated him. For he received from Yahweh honor and glory when there came such a voice from heaven, and he says, this is my beloved Son, whom I well please. And in this voice, let's go down to verse 19. He says, we have the prophetic word made more sure, which you do well to heed, as a light which shines in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star then arises in your hearts. Okay, knowing this, that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. For the prophecy did not come to former times by the will of man, but by holy men of old, notice, whom Yahweh spoke to. Okay, he spoke to them, he moved them with Spirit Holy, and they wrote these things down. And that's what we have to believe in, these prophets, the writings of the prophets, because Yeshua said, you fool, if you don't believe the prophets, all that the prophets have written. Now, the word prophet, according to the online etymological dictionary, it means a prophet is a person who speaks for Yahweh, one who foretells, but it also means an inspired preacher. Okay? An inspired preacher. Let me show you this. Man, the battery must be going out on the thing. A little bit more. A person who speaks for Yahweh, one who foretells. And notice it, an inspired preacher, okay? It's from the Old French and directly from the Latin. From the Greek, it means an interpreter, a spokesperson, okay? A spokesman. Remember that, Pastor, the two witnesses are a spokesperson, right? And it also means an inspired preacher or teacher, okay? So a prophet is an inspired teacher. In a non-religious sense, sometimes it's also as the messenger, okay? As the messenger. And remember what Proverbs 29:18 says, that if there's no prophetic vision, the people perish, okay? The people perish if there's no prophetic vision. So that shows the importance of why it's so important that we need to have this prophetic vision, okay? And of course, the prophetic vision is the understanding of the prophecies being brought forth in these last days. So we have this spokesperson, we have this inspired preacher, we have this inspired teacher in these last days, and we also have the messenger, okay? And those are all words of which this word prophet means. So it's very important, because if there is no inspired teacher, then that means the teachers that are left are all false ones, right? And they're going to teach the people whatever they think or whatever they dream up in their minds, as the prophet Jeremiah said, the imagination of their own minds. So they're going to bring this forth to the people. And remember the words of Jeremiah the prophet. He says, they said, I have dreamed, okay? So whatever they dream up in their minds, that's what they were teaching to the people. And he says, you will be no prophet unto me, you will be no priest unto me. You know, you will be a holy, I will raise up a holy and righteous priesthood, but you won't have any part in it. Now, since these people are not inspired by Yahweh, that means, of course, they're false preachers, right? They don't have the prophetic word. They don't have this understanding that is here. And notice what he says here. He continues on. He says, however, even though we today have the prophetic word made sure, because the prophecies of Yahweh are coming to pass in detail, Satan's preachers continue to proclaim damnable lies, and Yahweh's way of truth is defamed, and those who follow these preachers are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And that's what's occurring, is that people are dying. They're suffering these diseases. They're suffering all of the sickness and all of the pain and the misery and the things that the prophets have written about. They're suffering all of this because of the fact that they're following, they have no knowledge, they have no understanding. They're following what these preachers are teaching them. And that is, of course, against the laws of Yahweh. Well, in 2 Kepha here, 2, verses 1 and 2, he says, for there were false prophets among the people, then, just as there will be false prophets among you, who will secretly bring in damnable heresies, notice. They're damnable heresies because these heresies are teaching against the laws of Yahweh, and they're damnable because they're damning the people. They're damning the people to death. They're damning the people to all of these curses of sin, suffering, and so forth. Even denying the Redeemer who brought them. Notice, they deny the Redeemer. They deny Yeshua Messiah, right? They have changed that in the hearts and the minds of the people to believe that Jesus is the one that they need to be calling upon. The Redeemer who brought them, and they're bringing destruction upon themselves, notice. That describes it right there. So when Yahweh says they're going to be punished, this is what he's talking about. They're bringing the destruction upon themselves. Yahweh's not bringing it, but he's going to allow it because, remember, he says, choose this day whom you will serve, right? Either you will serve Yahweh or you will serve the gods. Well, if you serve the gods, Yahweh says, okay, if that's what you want, then go ahead. Serve the gods. And if you do, here's what you're going to have. And, of course, he's going to allow the curses to come upon you. You see how merciful Yahweh is? He doesn't force anybody. So right now, billions and billions of people are suffering because that's their choice. Remember, deception is a choice. Okay? Deception is something that you choose. You don't have to be deceived, but you choose deception. And so this whole world has gone the way of Cain. They've chosen that way. And they're suffering the curses. And many who follow these destructive ways, and because of them, The way of truth has been defamed. Now, as I said, if they're not Yahweh's preachers, then the scripture says, then they are Satan's preachers. They are lying preachers. They come up with the dreams of their own imagination, their own minds. An example of this, is remember, we're talking about devil worship, okay? Devil worship is what? Anything that teaches against the laws of Yahweh is devil worship, right? Anything that teaches against Yahweh, worshiping Yahweh and knowing Yahweh, is devil worship, plain and simple. Well, these preachers out there are teaching devil worship because they are the servants of the devil. They are the Satan's servants. So they do this. Now, one of the things, devil worship will always draw you away from the truth. And one of the things is, people always question, like, well, where did I come from? How did I make it here? Where did we come from? Did we come from another planet? Did we come from the stars? We're stardust, right? We're made from the same substance of the stars, and so we're stardust. We just, these little gold flakes came and hit the ground, and, the sun came out, and boom, we became human beings, Or did Elohim make us in some laboratory and bring us here, and all of these different stupid theories and stuff. Instead of looking at the scriptures and seeing and believing what it says, they go into all of this craziness of not looking upon Yahweh as the creator. And this is what devil worship is. It grabs the mind and it twists it and pulls it away. So it won't allow you to have any connection to the truth. Okay? And that's why it's called the tree of mixture of righteousness and evil. Okay? Because there's a little bit there that kind of looks like it's right, but it's all loaded with deception. So you can't keep one law and say you kept all 10, can you? If you break one, you break them all, as the scripture says. So this is the way of the mixture of righteousness and evil. And one of the things that they use, the big thing, is the Big Bang Theory, right? Because what that does there is it totally takes your mind away from Yahweh. You don't even think about Yahweh. Now remember, the Sabbath day. Why the Sabbath day is so important? Because we learn the Sabbath day, and that's our appointments that we'll be keeping forever with Yahweh. But the Sabbath day, you remember in Deuteronomy and in Exodus, it shows you that one place it shows you that we came out of Egypt. Remember that you came out of Egypt, okay, that you were slaves, but you were freed from that. Okay, and the other one is to remember the creation, why you were made, okay? And it tells you that too, that in 6 days Yahweh created the heavens and the earth, and the seventh day he made the Sabbath and gave it to man. Now, the Big Bang Theory, by believing in that, it takes the mind away from the Creator, because you don't believe in the Creator, because your mind is not, in that form of science, your mind is not on trying to believe religion. Science separates you from religion, and it separates you from the truth. You always try and figure things out hypothetically, okay? And you're always trying to figure something out in a formula. And how does something work? Well, that's like, I always use the examples like electricity. What is electricity? Well, the definition of electricity is electrons in motion. Fine. Makes sense to me. That's what it is. It's one electron moving, right? It's moving down. And it's actually almost like a reverse current, really, because you have the electrons lined up, so to speak, but every time there's a hole there, they're attracted to that, so they move up. And as they continue to move up, they keep moving holes behind them and so forth, which is called hole current. So you actually have two forms of current. But the thing is that electricity is electrons in motion. Great. But how does the electrons move? What causes electricity? What is electricity? They can't explain it. See? They only go so far and they stop. Well, with the Big Bang Theory, they've done this because it takes their mind completely away from the Creator. Okay? And in 1931, Monsignor George Lemaitre proposed in his hypothesis of the primeval atom, okay? Now, a hypothesis, according to the American English Dictionary, a hypothesis is a theory, okay? A theory is something that's taken to be true for the purpose of argument or investigation. It's an assumption, okay? That's what a hypothesis is. It's a theory. It's an assumption. It's something you assume, okay? I won't say anything about that word, but, okay, to assume something, okay? It's nothing. Now, primeval, it belongs to the first or the earliest age, or the ages of the original or the ancient. So his paper that he came up with was the hypothesis of the primeval Adam, okay? Now, in 1931, he proposed in his writing that the universe began with the explosion of the primeval atom, what was later called the Big Bang theory, okay? And he first took the cosmic rays to be the remnant of the events, although now it's a known fact that they actually originate from the local galaxy. But he thought that they were the remnants of this, okay? But now we know it's not. It's actually comes from the local galaxy. But that didn't change the fact that they still believe in this theory, okay? They still believe in, here's this picture. Okay? See his little white collar there. Okay, so, and then it says Monsignor George, name, a theologian who was the originator of the what was known as Big Bang Theory. Now, this is his profile from the Cosmic Horizons. See if I can. There we go. According to the Big Bang Theory, the expansion of the observable universe began with the explosion of a single particle at a definite point in time. Now, the startling idea first appeared in scientific form in 1931 in a paper by George Limmuwdyah, a Belgian cosmologist and Catholic priest. The theory was accepted by nearly all astronomers today, okay? But it was a radical departure from the scientific orthodox in the 1930s because many of the astronomers of the time were still uncomfortable with the idea that the universe was expanding and that the entire observable universe of galaxies began with a big bang, okay, seemed preposterous, okay? They thought this is crazy, But because it was accepted by some and then it was pushed and pushed and pushed, because it came from the Catholic Church, it gradually became acceptable, right? So he explored the logical consequences of expanding the universe, and he boldly proposed that it must be the original. It must have had originated at a finite point in time. If the universe is expanding, he thought, okay, he reasoned in his own mind, didn't reason with Yahweh, but in his own mind. Then he said it had to be smaller in the past, okay? So if you exploitate and go back, all right, in time, then you would come back to this extremely dense state, which he called the atom, okay? And all of a sudden it just blew up, the single particle blew up, the primeval atom, as he called it, which disintegrated into an explosion, and the idea marked the birth of what we now know as the Big Bang cosmology, okay? So he came up with this idea, and basically, when they force something like this on the other scientists, and then whether they believe it or not, eventually they have to begin to accept it because they're going to push it. Now, Pope Pius XII, okay, he was the one who was responsible, and oh boy, I love this thing. Okay, Pope Pius was the one who was responsible. He referred to the new theory of the origin of the universe as a scientific validation of the Catholic faith. Okay? So, he became the father of the Big Bang theory, okay? This Catholic priest. And so he came up with this. So then the Pope said, okay, great. Now it's an official Catholic doctrine, okay? And so now this is how they explained it, because had the Pope gone against it, then of course it wouldn't have been accepted into the establishment of the scientists. But of course, since it was, and this was something that was pushed forward. I mean, any scientist, and there's a lot of Catholic scientists, but what Catholic scientists would fight against what the Pope said, right? Now, I found this other article I thought was rather interesting because this Massachusetts physicist, he's pretty young, I think he's only like 30 years old, he claims that he solved the mystery of how life emerged from matter. Okay? And it says the origin of life is attributed to luck or labeled as some kind of miracle, but one physicist believes that under the right conditions, the creation of life is predictably unavoidable. In other words, life has got to occur. Okay. Now remember, we're talking about this devil worship. Keep in mind, anything that deceives the hearts and the minds of the people is devil worship. According to Jeremy England, an assistant professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, okay? I mean, if he's from MTI, yeah, man, he's MIT, he's got to be something else, I mean, that's just where all the big, brains come from, right? So he's an associate professor. This is really going to bump him up, too. Well, he naturally recognizes, it says matter naturally, according to him, he says matter, it's going to drive us crazy. Okay, matter naturally reorganizes itself to acquire the crucial physical characteristics of life. The ability to disperse great quantities of energy when driven by an outside source, such as the sun, and bathe in the right atmosphere, or oceanic conditions. Now, he's 31 years old, and he explained to the scientific publication and so forth that he says, you start with this is what I want you to see right here. You start with a random clump of atoms, and if you shine light on it for long enough, it should not be surprising that you'll get a plant. Right? You'll get a plant. So just get you a bunch of atoms and shine a little bit of light, flashlight on it long enough, and it's going to grow, right? The new theory points to that matter is most likely to react to the external energy sources that are bearing down on it. Or if a particular energy source is constantly surrounding a group of atoms over time, they will inevitably restructure themselves to better consume and disperse the energy around them. The process England proposes is the driving force that ultimately led to life. Now, notice that, okay? He still doesn't know what life is, and he's not admitting that he knows what life is. He's simply saying that life could come around, right? The driving force that ultimately led to life. If correct, the theory could push biologists to view the various forms of life as different methods to disperse energy and remove the need to define every adaptation within the lens of natural selection. Remember, natural selection was Darwin's theory, right? But still, England says, well, his theory is not meant to work alongside of Darwin's theory, but not to replace it or undermine it. Although the undermining of the idea behind England's theory is that energy dispersion in the central force is the central force of guiding natural processes that include life. So it's going to make him really into something, okay? But here's the thing. Now, through his magnificent show of piety of physics, right, he's actually showing that he's ignorant of the scriptures, okay? And these people always do. But he's actually proven that Yahweh is true. Because notice what he said. He said, you start with a random clump of atoms, and you shine light on it for long enough, it should not be surprising that you get a plant. That kind of sounds a little accurate, doesn't it? I mean, plants need photosynthesis, it gets it from light and so forth. But what does the scripture say? I want you to notice what he says and what the scripture says. In Genesis 1, verses 9 through 12, it says, and Yahweh said, let the water under the sky be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And Yahweh called the dry land earth. And he gathered the waters and he called the seas that Yahweh saw that it was fitting. Yahweh said, let the earth produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land, bear fruit according to the various kinds. And it was so. And the earth produced vegetation, seed-bearing plants and their kinds, and a seed-bearing tree according to their kinds. And Yahweh saw that it was right. And the evening and the morning was the third day. And Yahweh said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky and the firmament, right, to separate the day from the night. Let them serve as signs to mark the feast for days and for years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the firmament to give light on the earth. And it was so. And so the evening and the morning were the fourth day. So, did you catch that? What did he say? He said, well, you could start with a random clump of atoms, and if you shine light on it long enough, it should not be surprising that you would get a plant. So what he's saying here is that you've got to have light and the plant. You've got to have the light before you have the plant, right? What did Yahweh say? In Genesis 1, 12 to 15 and 19, the earth produced vegetation, seed-bearing plants according to their kind, and seed-bearing trees according to their kind on the third day. You get that? And then Yahweh said, let there be lights in the expanse of the firmament to give light on the earth. When? On the fourth day. He made the plants before he made the light. So you see the ignorance that these people show when they do this kind of stuff? But if you're not careful, it looks very deceiving. And people say, oh yeah, well that makes sense. Yeah, you got to have light to make something grow, you know. But Yahweh outsmarted these guys, you know, long ago with what he did. You know, it's just another attempt to influence the hearts and the minds of the people of the earth to teach them devil worship and to get them away from believing in Yahweh and believing in his perfect laws is what gives us life. So it's just another means by which they use to deceive people. Now notice what it says here on the next page. Nuclear war, because this is what all this is coming about. Because remember, if you don't, Yahweh's way is the only way of peace. Satan's way is the way of war. And Cain proved that, remember? Cain went, and it says the whole world is following the way of Cain. And Yahweh told Cain, he said, Cain, you reject this, you leave my house, you're going to find continual war. That's all that's going to plague you. And sure enough, you see in all of his descendants, they chose the way of Cain. In fact, remember his descendants even were the ones who came up with the weapons production. They're the ones who came up with learning how to use the metal and producing the swords and the javelins and so forth and the weapons of war. Now, nuclear war here says nuclear war does not involve just the superpowers, as many have previously believed. Nuclear war will affect every man, woman, and child on the face of the planet. You know, every nation of the world will be involved. Nation will fight against nation, and kingdom will war against kingdom. And it's going to affect everybody because the ultimate result is going to be death. It's going to bring death upon this world. I mean, when you think about these bombs, that one single bomb can be 1,000 times greater. You can see the amount of destruction. You can see how we covered before, how the earth is going to reel to and fro, back and forth, because of the fact that it's not going to be able to handle what's going on in. You know, it's going to be such devastation. And that's, remember, like it describes the earth like it says, like a drunkard reeling to and fro, right? It's also going to be like trying to shake loose from what's going on it, you know, trying to shake this stuff off of it and get it off of it, because the earth is going to be suffering, remember. That earth is not just some lifeless matter. The earth is composed of all of these living organisms that will be suffering tremendously. But Yahweh will have to, you know, Yahweh has the power to take life. Yahweh has the power to bring life back again, too. And so he has to allow this to take place, and that cleansing is going to have to take effect, and that's the only way that the cleansing can come about to destroy these things, because these prions and so forth, remember, 850 degrees to destroy them, try and heat that up on your skillet, you know. You would have nothing but less than ashes, because you'd have to melt it down beyond the point of ashes till it almost completely is disintegrated, you know, in order to cleanse something like that. under that amount of tremendous heat. Well, this type of war will begin, okay, in the tribulation, as it talks about. And it says, when this world could not possibly survive, when millions of people have been wasted, when cities have been reduced to rubble. Remember, and that's what the prophets talk about, that it will look this way. And the atmosphere is filled with death, causing powder and dust, the nuclear fallout, the radioactive nuclear fallout, the clouds that will form, and they will cover the earth. And this will be the darkness and the day of gloominess that will be upon the whole earth. It will darken the sky and reduce the visibility of the sun and the moon, effectively turning them to blood. Now remember, blood, when it says it would turn them to blood, blood also refers to the fact that this causes death, okay? So like when it says that the waters would be turned to blood, it means the things in the waters are going to be dying off, which they are now. The things in the air, the things on the land, all of these things. And remember, anything that lives on land needs the air, okay? If the air is destroyed, then it will be destroyed as well. When this world, now, remember too now, when in earlier times, when the flood came with Noah, okay? Remember, this wiped out all of the land, right? It wiped out anything that lived on land. But what lived in the water was still okay. It was water. But when the fire comes from the nuclear wars, it's going to wipe out everything on the land again and destroy these things. However, the waters will also be affected, because this radioactivity is also going to fall into the water and mix with the water. And you've seen what took place in not too long ago in the electric plant there in Japan, and the amount of radiation that has gone into the oceans from there. So these things are also going to be affected. So the entire earth is going to be affected in this last time. And that's what the prophets talk about the waters turning to blood. And it talks about the drinking water, and it also talks about the sea water and the fresh waters and so forth. So it's going to be turned to blood. And when this is absolute, there is absolutely no possibility that mankind could survive by himself. Well, when this takes place, then and only then will Yahweh send Yeshua Messiah back to the earth. Okay, that will be the time when our deliverance will come. We will have to see these things take place. We're going to be delivered. However, we're going to see the destruction come. Now, Matthew 24, verses 29 and 30, we find that Yeshua will return immediately, but after the Great Tribulation. Now, immediately but after the Tribulation, in those days, will the sun be darkened, and the moon will not give her light, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Okay? The powers of the heavens will be shaken. Remember, that's because the earth is going to be moving to and fro, back and forth. That in itself, when it talks about the earthquakes and so forth that's going to take place, and the great earthquake that will shake and so forth, you know, it's going to be tremendous. And then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then will all the earth, the tribes of the earth mourn, when they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of the heavens with great power and great glory. Now, Yeshua Messiah is coming after the Great Tribulation, just as the Scripture says. However, we know that nuclear war will have taken place before his coming. He said, the passage writes, I'd like to remind you again of the effects of a nuclear explosion, that fires, smoke, soot, and dust will block out the sunlight. Now, remember, when this is in the sunlight, when this is all blacked out in the sunlight, this is going to cause such devastation, because the plants are going to be affected, but not only the plants, but everything else that needs sunlight. It's going to affect the moods of the people and so forth too, because they need that sunlight. But there's so many different things that are in the air that is needed for things to grow and for people to grow and to eat and so forth, and to actually survive, to breathe the air and so forth. All of these things are going to be radioactive. So you can see that Yahweh says eventually he will begin to draw the nations to Abel. He's going to protect those people, those whom he's calling out. Somehow or other, that he's going to allow them to survive. But the soot, smoke, and dust and all this stuff will block out the sunlight. And if we read Deuteronomy 28:24, then Yahweh will make the rain of the land powder and dust. this radioactive fallout will come down until the people of the world are destroyed. Powder and dust. And that's the thing, is remember that this stuff it's dust. It can be very fine dust. And when you see the pictures of the nuclear explosions going off, you see where it sucks up and it leaves a big, huge crater. Now, where all that land that was in that crater was sucked up like a big giant vacuum cleaner and pulled up, and then, of course, it's swirled around and it goes out up into the upper atmosphere, which pulls it and moves it around the whole earth. So this powder and this dust will be there. And then, of course, it can't stay up there forever. It's got to come down because it's heavier than air. The air will keep it floating to a certain extent, but eventually the weight of the gravity is going to pull it down. So this is going to start falling down upon the earth. And if you remember, like they said, white light, black rain. Remember that expression, because of the fact of the white light, the super bright light, and then the rain that fell was black, because that was the soot that was in there, that was mixed up with the clouds. So when this stuff comes down, it will be dust, as it says, but in some places they may also receive rain, and they will think that it might be pure rain, but it's not. It's going to be death falling down upon them. And then, of course, famine and pestilence is going to come with war. Now, here's what's, famine and pestilence comes from war. Now, Yahweh says, we're going to teach this world that they will learn war no more. You really, really need to think about war and how horrible it is. And I'm not talking about the fighting of the war. Okay, that's bad enough. But there's so many various different things that affects that. For one thing, this wicked system that is here, that is the system of Cain, the devil worship. They take young men and young women whose minds are already into the cares of this world and so forth. They take them and they break them down in boot camps. They break them down so that they're dependent upon the government, okay? Whatever branch of service they go into. They break them down, they start working on their brains, they start tearing them down, and then they start building them up again. Once they've torn them down to a certain degree, then they start building them back up again into proud soldiers. Now they turn them into war machines. They turn them into beings that hate other people. They turn them into someone who will go and take the life of someone else. That's the enemy. They go, they send them off to war, they go in war. The first time they have to kill someone, they're frightened to death. They do it. They can see a person's eyes sometimes looking straight at them with fear, but they're quicker than they are, and they kill them. That screws their head up so bad. And then they think, well, okay, that wasn't too bad. I can survive this. And so they do it over and over and over again. Now, when they're done doing their duty, or sometimes they don't because they get shot or whatever and blown up or whatever, or hurt, and then they have to come back. They don't care about them. They're used pieces of property, okay? You become Uncle Sam's property. You become government property when you become a soldier. And there's no guarantee of you being taken care of. And you see all the problems that they have now because they don't care about the veterans when they come back from war. They're not worried about what they have to go through. And there's so many suicides that take place as a result because of the fact of what they went through. And they don't care. They don't care about how mangled up their bodies are. They don't care about how twisted their minds are. They've used them. And that's it. Now you're on your own, buddy. You got to survive until the day that you die. You don't worry about us. Well, you got a little problem, you can go over to the VA hospital and we'll kind of patch you up a little bit, and throw them on drugs. And that way they can get them out of their hair, But they're not concerned about them. Now, that's just one of the things of the disgusting things that there is about war, because of the fact that people's minds are twisted, they're warped. Now these people have nightmares, and they're scared to death, and they can't even live a normal life. Many of them have families, they have wives and children, and the women come back, they have husbands and they have children and stuff, but they can't adjust to the home life any longer. That's something that they left behind. They had to. One time I saw where this one woman, she was a single mother and she had 2 children. She couldn't make ends meet. So she decided, well, the only thing I can do, I guess, is join the service. I'll join the service because at least the government will give me a check and I can take care of my 2 children. Well, she goes in, she goes to boot training and comes out, and she's shipped off to overseas. So her mother had to take care of the grandchildren. I don't know whether she ever made it back or not. But that just shows you how wicked this system is. You see how evil it is? You see how damnable evil this system is? And how they don't give a flip about you? This is what we're going to do when we're able to bring forth the peaceful solution to them. They will no longer learn war. They won't be affected by these things. We're going to bring them out of all of this stuff. And then you see the famine and the pestilence, the diseases. All of this is taught because they won't teach them the truth. The whole world is locked up into this devil worship. And because of that, they're not taught to keep the laws of Yahweh. They're not taught to keep the laws that would keep them in health. They're not taught the laws that will bring them peace and peace of mind and how to deal with your neighbor and so forth. The laws of Yahweh deal with everything that you can possibly think of, and how to deal with your business, how to deal with your brother. This is why the universe is going to be looking for us, brethren. They need the saviors to come to them to bring them this great joy. And you know why they're going to be in joy? Because we're going to put an end to sin. Sin never again. It's not going to exist, okay? And Yahweh says he's going to do away with all of the gods. The gods are no longer going to exist. We're going to wipe them out. We're going to destroy them through the works of bringing forth this peaceful solution, bringing the laws of Yahweh to the universe. And when we do that, yes, they're going to be looking forward. They're looking forward to us now, okay? Because they know that when we come, we're going to do away with the sin that's in their lives too. And the sin that's in their lives is what's bringing the destruction to their planets, to their solar systems, to their galaxies. But before that, this earth is also going to be rejoicing because the microbes themselves, all of creation is looking forward to the sons of Yahweh being revealed. And that's what we're working on now, is trying to be acceptable with Yahweh. So Yahweh can say, yes, these are my sons. These are the ones who will be bringing peace to you. These are the ones that you can rely upon. And that's how we're starting to come into unity with Yahweh, so we can have that unity to be able to refresh this earth, and have the power over every living creature, as Genesis 1:26 talks about. With this famine and this pestilence, it comes from war. Because, when you go in with a war, you're guaranteed to have famine and disease. You have to. Because you've gone in and you've wiped out all of the infrastructure. You look at these places that were cities. When you look through on the news and you see these places, here will be concrete buildings and stuff, and now they're just masses of rubble that's sitting there. These people have no homes, the ones who survived. And just think of all the dead bodies that's buried underneath there, who they can't get out of the rubble. Their bodies decompose, which brings forth diseases and stuff. And so this brings forth more disease throughout the camps of the people who survive. And, of course, it brings forth famine, because now when you start wiping people out, who's going to take care of the crops? You don't have any farmers anymore. You don't have anybody that can take care of this stuff. And not everybody is a farmer. Not everybody knows how to do that, Other people live in the cities and towns and so forth. So when you begin to wipe out this system that can keep people alive, the death rate increases. And this is Satan's way. This is this evil, beastly system. But it's all tied into war. And remember, what Jacob said about war, right? What causes the war amongst you? It's the lusting after these things, the illegal lust, illegal meaning against the laws of Yahweh. Whatever you will, remember Yahweh also said in Genesis, he said, well, whatever they go after, they're going to be accomplished. They're able to accomplish these things. He's going to allow man to go his own way to prove to mankind that he can't exist on his own way, going his own way. So the famine and the pestilence comes with war, as Matthew 24 verse 7 says. And they will be intensified, of course. They'll be intensified from the nuclear war as it's going to come about. You know, it's going to be nuclear wars, and then the big war is going to come about. And if all of these things are coming, he says, because mankind as a whole would not obey every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh. Remember, and that's what Yeshua said, that man doesn't live by bread alone, right? He must live by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh. And of course, he got that from the law. In Deuteronomy 28, he says, if you do not carefully observe and do the words of this law that is written in this book. You know, many times you see where it says observe and to do. Well, you think all these words mean the same thing. Well, they're similar in meanings. But it shows you, as he says here, you must carefully do these things, okay? You must observe them and you must do them. Because some things you observe, which means you agree with and you will stand up for, and then you do them, that are written in this book in order that you may reverence Yahweh, okay? Yahweh your Father. So you reverence Yahweh by keeping his laws. And this is how Yahweh knows us, right? Like it says in 2 Timothy. He marks us. That's the mark of Yahweh, is those who will keep his laws, those who will follow his ways. That's the one that Yahweh sees. That's the ones that Yahweh acknowledges. We're the ones that he's concerned with in this world. You know, Yahweh's in complete control. He knows. Just like Satan, she has the whole world, she's got the whole world deceived, so she ain't worried about the world. Her concern is to try and pull us out. You realize that? 7 billion people are deceived. Why? Because of you. Because of you. That's how hard Satan has to work. She has to deceive 7 billion people just to try and pull you out, to get you deceived. Each and every one of us. And that's why we need to look at it. We are 1 out of 7 billion people. Satan has the whole world deceived, and she has to, in order to try and keep everybody out of the house of Yahweh. So she's not satisfied with the whole world being deceived. She's working extremely hard with us, trying to get us pulled out. But that's the protection that we have with Yahweh. That if we keep these laws of Yahweh, then we will be under the shadow of his protection, and he will watch over us and keep us safe. And if we believe all that the prophets have spoken, we will never, ever be deceived, because we can't be, because we believe in what Yahweh says. Okay, we're going to stop here on page 69 here. We'll take off here next week.